My name is Jenna. I'm 28 now, and I still sleep with the lights on. Not a night light, the actual overhead light, full brightness, every single night. My therapist thinks it's an anxiety response. She's probably right. But anxiety or not, what happened to me when I was 22 is the reason I do it, and I don't think I'll ever fully stop. At the time, I was renting the upstairs floor of an older two-story home in a mid-sized city a few hours from where I grew up. The landlord lived out of state and was barely reachable. He told me during the walkthrough that the downstairs unit was being renovated before he rented it out again. He said it would be a few months. He said someone would come by occasionally to do work here and there. He said a lot of things that turned out not to mean much. The apartment itself was fine. One bedroom, a small living room, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a kitchen that fit exactly one person at a time. Low ceilings. Everything creaked if you breathed wrong. Old house sounds. The kind you're supposed to get used to. For the first few weeks, I did. Then one night, around 1 a.m, I was lying in bed scrolling my phone when I heard it. A single footstep from directly below me. Not a pop or a creak the way old houses settle. This was weight pressing deliberately on a floorboard. The sound of a person's foot. I held my breath and waited. Another footstep, then silence. I told myself it was the house. I set my phone down, stared at the ceiling, and eventually fell asleep. The next day, I went down and checked the first floor. Empty, dusty. The only furniture was a broken table shoved against one wall. No sign of anyone, no sign that anyone had been through. Both entry doors were locked. I felt embarrassed standing there in the quiet, like I'd made something out of nothing. The night after that, nothing happened. I started to relax. I told myself I had gotten spooked my first week and let my imagination fill in gaps. Then it happened again. 12:30 in the morning. Same heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate, 2 or 3 at a time, then silence, then a few more. It lasted maybe 2 minutes and then just stopped. I sat up and muted the TV and listened, but there was nothing else. I texted my friend Marcus. He made a joke and I laughed, but I barely slept that night. Over the next week, it kept happening. Always late, always the same rhythm. Footsteps, silence, footsteps again. Twice it sounded like someone pacing. Once I heard something that sounded exactly like a cabinet door shutting. That one stopped me completely because there was no furniture in that apartment. No cabinets. No reason for that sound to exist. I called the landlord. He was dismissive. Old houses make old noises, he said. There's nothing to worry about. He sounded more annoyed than concerned. I got off the phone feeling more unsettled than before I dialed. I started locking both my apartment door and the internal door that connected the 2 floors. Something I hadn't bothered doing before. I started keeping a kitchen knife on the nightstand. Not because I felt brave, because I felt the opposite. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I had already started accepting that my instincts were telling me something real. About 2 weeks in, I came home late on a Friday night, close to 2 a.m. I stepped through my apartment door and stopped. I can't point to anything specific that had changed. The lights were off the same as I left them. Nothing appeared moved or touched. But something felt wrong in the way a room feels wrong before you can name the reason. Like the air was different. Like the space had been occupied and wasn't quite settled yet. I stood in the doorway for a long minute, listening. Then from below me, a thud. Something hitting a wall or furniture, and then footsteps again, slow and deliberate, moving directly beneath me from one end of the room to the other. I backed out of my apartment before I even made the decision to do it. My body moved before my brain finished the thought. I sat in my car with the doors locked and called the police. They came. They went through the entire first floor. They found nothing. One officer was patient with me. The other looked at me like I was wasting his time. They left me with the advice to call back if anything else happened. And that was that. After that, I started noticing small things I'd been explaining away. One afternoon, I came home from work and the door to the first floor was open by maybe an inch. I had closed it after the police visit. I was certain of that. Another time, I smelled cigarette smoke on the side of the house, near one of the ground floor windows. Nobody in the area smoked, not that I had ever noticed. Then one night, the footsteps stopped directly below my bedroom. Not moving from place to place, just stopped, stood still. And then I heard tapping. 3 slow, even taps on the ceiling below me, which was the first floor ceiling above me, the floor I was lying on top of. Silence. Then 3 more. Same rhythm. Same spot. I texted Marcus without explaining anything. I said I needed somewhere to stay. I grabbed my bag and I left. The next day he came back with me. We walked the whole first floor together and I showed him everything I'd been noticing. Near the end of the walkthrough, he crouched down near one of the lower kitchen cabinets and said, "What is that?" Pushed far in the back behind the baseboard was a cigarette butt. Not old, not dusty, fresh. My therapist says it's anxiety. She's right, but I earned every bit of it. I was 21 when this happened. I was working the closing shift at a small gas station a few towns over from where I lived. One of those jobs I only planned to keep for a few months while I figured out what came next. The shifts during the day were boring but manageable. People getting gas, buying snacks, paying in cash and moving on. Normal enough. The nights were different. The place felt too bright inside and too dark outside. And every customer felt slightly stranger than the last. But I kept telling myself that was just the nature of working alone after midnight. Then one Tuesday night, around 9 in the evening, the phone behind the counter rang. I picked it up without thinking. The second I did, something felt wrong. The voice on the other end was low and drawn out, theatrical, like a bad impression of a horror movie villain. It asked if I was all alone in the store. I said something sarcastic and hung up. I figured it was one of my friends messing with me. I texted the group chat. They all denied it, which they would have said either way. I went back to wiping down the counter and tried not to think about it. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same voice. It asked why I hung up. I gave another dismissive answer. Then the voice laughed, and that laugh was the first moment I felt genuinely unsettled. It wasn't playful. It was quiet and slow, and when it faded, the voice said that I shouldn't be rude to people who know where I am. I hung up again. There were still enough customers coming through to keep me distracted, but every time it slowed down, I found myself staring at the phone like I was expecting it to ring before it did. It rang a third time around 10:40. The voice asked if the store always got this quiet this late. I hadn't said anything about the store being quiet. That detail wasn't something anyone guessing or joking would have known to say. My stomach turned. I hung up without responding and immediately texted my friends one by one. More seriously this time. Each of them had alibis. One sent me a photo from his basement. One said he was half an hour away at a friend's place. None of them were near that highway. The calls kept coming. Around 11, I stopped answering. The phone would ring, I'd stare at it, it would stop, and then a minute or two later it would ring again. That went on for about 15 minutes. I started checking the cameras more often after that third call. The monitor behind the counter showed 4 feeds, 2 inside, 2 outside. The outside cameras covered the front pumps and the far side of the lot, but there were gaps. The back of the building near the dumpster was barely visible. The strip of trees behind the property was completely off-frame. I kept rotating through the feeds every few minutes, half expecting to see one of my idiot friends crouched out there, laughing into their phone. I never did. What I saw instead, or thought I saw, was harder to process. Once I could have sworn there was a shape at the edge of the tree line on the far camera. Just a darkness that was slightly denser than the rest. But the image quality at night was too poor to be sure of anything. I talked myself out of it. I was good at talking myself out of things by then. I started flipping through the security camera feeds on the monitor behind the counter. The store sat alone off a road that went dead after 10. There was a small patch of woods on one side of the building and a narrow area by the dumpster on the other. The cameras had blind spots. The image quality at night was grainy. I kept scanning, expecting to catch someone crouched outside laughing. I didn't see anyone. Then I started hearing sounds from outside. A soft tap against the siding. What sounded like a scrape near the far wall. Then gravel shifting from the direction of the back of the building, like something landing on it. Each sound had an easy explanation on its own. Together, they didn't. At 11:40, the door opened and a customer came in. Regular looking at first glance, late 20s, maybe 30, plain clothes, nothing immediately alarming. But he walked in without saying anything and drifted slowly through the aisles. He took far too long for someone who ended up buying one bag of chips. More than once, I watched the top half of his face appear over the shelf tops, looking toward the counter. Not casually, deliberately, like he was checking on something. He came up to the register eventually, still hadn't said a word. I scanned the chips. I looked down at the register for a moment, maybe 2 seconds, and when I looked back up, he was staring directly at me. Not glancing, staring. He held it for what felt like a long time with no expression. Then he looked down, paid, took the bag, and walked toward the door. Right before he stepped outside, he stopped. He turned his head back without turning his body. Chin tilted slightly down so his eyes were looking up at me from beneath his brow. And he smiled. Not a polite smile, not an awkward one. He was showing me the smile. He knew exactly how it looked and he was doing it on purpose. Then he stepped out and instead of walking toward any pump or any car, he walked around the side of the building with his eyes still on me through the glass, right up until the angle cut him off. I switched to the rear camera feed and watched him round the building. He walked toward the tree line on the far side. Then he was in the blind spot. He never appeared on the other side. I waited 10 seconds, 20, a minute, nothing. I locked the door early. I texted everyone I could think of and told them there was someone outside who had scared me and this was serious and not a joke. I rushed through everything I needed to do to close. At midnight, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the front door, and stepped out. The walk to my car was maybe 40 feet. I made it almost the whole way. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not running, but faster than walking, deliberate, closing distance. I turned and he was there. He had come from the front corner of the building and he was moving directly toward me and my car. Standing there in that lot, watching him come at me from around the corner of the building, I had maybe 2 seconds to make a decision. I didn't think it through. My hands just moved. I yanked the door, threw myself in, locked it behind me. He was close enough by then that I could hear his footsteps clearly over the engine starting. Not running. Still that same urgent, deliberate pace, like he wasn't worried about whether I'd make it or not. I reversed without looking properly. I don't know how I didn't hit anything. The second my tires hit the main road, I floored it and didn't slow down until I was 3 towns over and my hands had finally stopped shaking on the wheel. I threw myself inside, locked the door, started the engine, and reversed out of that lot so fast I almost lost control. In the mirror, I could see him standing in the lot lights, completely still, watching me go. I called my boss the next day and told him everything. He watched the camera footage and told me the guy looked like a normal customer. He said I was probably just on edge from the phone calls and connecting things that weren't actually related. I quit shortly after. I was done arguing about it. I knew what I had experienced. I knew what those sounds outside meant. I knew what that smile meant. And I knew that the man who had called me all night and the man who walked through that door were almost certainly the same person, even if the footage didn't show it clearly enough to prove it. I can't prove it, but I know what happened that night, and I know that when I drove out of that parking lot, I was driving away from something that had been building for hours toward a very specific end. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't made it to the car in time. I think about it more than I should. This happened about a year ago. I worked the overnight shift at a large retail store, the kind that never fully closes and runs through the small hours with a skeleton crew scattered across the floor. I normally cover electronics, which is quiet by midnight. The customers at that hour are insomniacs, truckers, people who just need somewhere to be. I knew all the regular types. I thought I knew what to watch for. That's why it took me longer than it should have to clock what was happening. I had noticed him first about 20 minutes into my shift, which started at 11. He'd been near the gaming accessories when I first spotted him. Not holding anything, not looking at the boxes, just standing there. I had written it off. People stand around in stores. But when I moved to restock the cable display on the other side of the section, he moved too. Not immediately. He waited a few minutes, the way someone waits when they're trying to look casual. Then he appeared at the end of my new aisle. I tried meeting his eyes once to give him the chance to ask me something, the way a normal person would if they needed help. He looked away, not embarrassed, deliberate, like he didn't want the direct acknowledgement. That was the detail that finally made my stomach tighten. He didn't want to be seen seeing me. He just wanted to see me. I reached for my radio and got static. The battery indicator was blinking red. I clicked through to try to raise someone and got nothing. Dead. I set it back on my belt and told myself I would go find a manager as soon as I finished the row I was on. That was maybe 3 minutes before the woman grabbed my arm. He'd been in the store for maybe 20 minutes before it fully registered. At first I thought he was just wandering. Someone killing time. Not sure what he wanted, but the longer it went on, the clearer it became. He wasn't looking at anything. He wasn't picking anything up or checking prices or glancing at his phone. He was positioned. Every spot he stood gave him a direct sightline to where I was working. And every time I looked up, he was there, close enough to notice, far enough not to approach. My radio was dead. Battery had given out earlier in the shift and I hadn't swapped it yet. I was thinking about whether it was worth walking to find a manager when a hand wrapped around my arm from behind. I spun so fast I nearly knocked the display over. A woman was standing right there, smiling like we were old friends at a reunion, holding my arm like she'd been looking for me for hours. She said loudly, "There you are." Loud enough that a few nearby customers looked over. Then she pulled me slightly toward her and dropped her voice to barely above a whisper. "That guy's been recording you. Follow me." I turned slightly to look. He was still there, and now he wasn't even pretending to browse. He was standing still, arms at his sides, looking directly at me. I let her pull me. I didn't think about it. She had read the situation, announced herself publicly to create witnesses, and she was getting me away from him. I felt relieved, genuinely relieved. I was grateful someone had noticed. She kept the act going as we walked, talking cheerfully about something, laughing lightly, two friends moving through the store together. I was barely listening. I kept glancing behind me, waiting to see if he was following. Eventually I looked back and couldn't see him anymore. I told her we were good now and that we should go find my manager and report it. She kept walking. I said it again, a little more firmly. She squeezed my arm and said he was probably still nearby. I stopped moving. "You can let go," I said. She didn't. She smiled at me and said, "Come on, just a little further." I looked around. The store was nearly empty at that end. We had passed the registers and the self-checkout lanes and every aisle that saw any kind of foot traffic. The lights were dimmer here. Ahead of us was the warehouse section. Rows of shelves in low light, no customers, no co-workers in sight. And past the warehouse was the side exit. The one without cameras. The one used only for loading. She was walking me directly to it. I screamed for help. One word, as loud as I could get it. I yanked my arm and pulled free. She lost her grip for just a second and I didn't give her another chance. I ran toward the front of the store as fast as I could. Behind me she called out for me to come back. And then she said my name. My full name. Clearly, like she'd known it for a long time. I had never told her my name. A coworker came running toward me from the other end of the aisle. I told him to call security and he did. By the time security responded, both of them were gone. The footage from that night showed her and the man entering the store together. He had walked ahead to position himself near electronics. She had entered separately and waited, timing her approach to when I would be alone and off radio. The camera coverage in that area was partial and she had used it. Her face was turned away in every single frame. Every one. His face was caught clearly, not hers. In the days after it happened, I kept trying to work backward through it. They had come in together but separated on purpose. He had positioned himself where I worked, drew my attention and held it, made sure I was unsettled and off radio and alone. She had waited somewhere else in the store until the timing was right, then approached as the solution. The rescue that wasn't a rescue. The friendly stranger who already knew my name. The route she walked me on, past the cameras, past the coworker stations, toward the side exit wasn't improvised. Someone had been in that store before and mapped it. Someone had figured out which exit had the lightest camera coverage. Someone had learned my section, my schedule, enough about me to know my name before they even walked through the door. I've gone over it so many times. I've tried to remember if I noticed anyone watching me in the weeks before, in the parking lot, at the bus stop, anywhere. I can't place anything specific, but that's the part that stays with me. The watching would have happened before I had any reason to be watching back. The police were called. It was documented as a failed abduction attempt. I was told the method, the friendly stranger, the staged rescue, the route toward a blind exit, was consistent with a calculated approach. Not improvised, practiced. What stays with me even now is the name. I had never spoken to that woman before that night. She didn't ask for it, didn't read a name tag, didn't hear a coworker use it. She came into that store already knowing who she was looking for. They had chosen me before they walked through the door. I was not a random target. I was a specific one. I still work the same job. My manager changed my schedule, so I'm never alone in that section anymore. The cameras got upgraded. I changed my route home, changed my habits, changed the way I think about people who linger a little too long. None of that fully quiets the part of my brain that wonders how they found me. Whether they had been watching me before that night. Whether I had walked past one of them somewhere and never noticed. Whether the man near the electronics section had been in that store on nights before, learning my routine, reporting back. I think about what would have happened if I'd kept following her. If I hadn't looked up and noticed where we were heading. If I'd walked through that side exit into whatever was waiting on the other side. I'm still here. That's the only ending I have. But I think about the other ending more than I'd like to admit.